Hey again everyone, welcome to another video from everyone here at BlenderTech.com. If you enjoy it or learned something, you know the drill. Consider liking it and consider subscribing for more Blender, Unity 3D, programming, and all sorts of other related videos. Lastly, don't forget our motto, create your way. Recently, most of the emails and call for help requests I've been receiving have been related to UV unwrapping, how to render something once it's unwrapped and textured, and low poly game assets. So I was thinking, how can I answer all of these in one go without making 30 different videos, answer people's questions, but are basically just going to be a clutter of videos for one people, which I don't mind doing one bit, but I'd rather kill a bunch of birds with one stone, or as Ricky might say, get two birds stoned at once. I decided as I was walking down the street a couple days ago that I could make a really low poly street sign and show how to unwrap it, how to texture it, how to add in a few details with a simple height map, a bump map, and maybe even a normal map if time permits. Definitely a specularity map to get that retro reflection, whatever you call it, that they put on the sign so you can see with your headlights in the dark and whatever. So I thought that might be a good idea, so I make a full-fledged tutorial on that. A fan also suggested when I'm typing in on an area or there's something of interest to try to zoom and pan into that area when it's really needed, so I've been practicing that in Camtasia Studio as well. So anyways, so let's get started. So I'm going to keep this fairly simple. So yeah, we'll just start out with a circle, obviously the base of a sign. We'll tab into edit mode. We'll fill that in. I'm not going to worry about n-gons, tries, quads, all that deal right now. I'm just going to stick to the basics. We will extrude this up 1/4 of a unit. We'll call that our base. We'll duplicate that, Shift D, right click, and we'll scale that down to about 1/10, 0.1. You can always adjust it later. We'll extrude that up, maybe try 5 units. And then I'm going to select this face up here with face select mode, and I'm just going to go Shift S and cursor to selected, and then we'll add in a plane to act as our actual sign. So we'll rotate that around the Y 90 degrees. I've got this backwards again. It should be rotated 90 degrees, or whatever, it'll work fine. We'll turn on line snapping mode, edge snapping, whatever you want to call it. We'll put our mouse cursor right here. We'll grab along the Z and then hold down Control, and alright, we'll do that again. G, Z, Control, and we'll snap it right to that edge. I'm not going to worry too much about making this look like a real sign. I'm going to keep it, like I said, really simple to make unwrapping easier for people that aren't masters of it. I'm not a master of it. I wouldn't expect anybody that's learning it to be. And then we need to give our cube some depth. So I'm going to grab it along the X, negative 0.1. And then I'm going to extrude along the X, double that, so 0.2. So I should have it centered still while maintaining the offset, and it just so happens that it lines up perfectly. So it's fairly basic. I think I might resize that, go to front view, like I said, be right view now since I got this all backwards, rotated wrong. So in right view and side view, I'm going to make this more of a sign shape. Just going to select a bit of it and hit Control L for length. That's why I like creating meshes made out of separate meshes. Essentially, as you can see here, each part is a separate mesh so that I can edit them independently like that. I can grab a part, then just hit Control L to grab that entire part. That's how I do a huge part of my modeling so that I can fix any mistakes and modify it at later dates. But I'm going to take the actual sign part. I'm going to scale it along the Y a bit. Just a little bit, let's say 0.75 maybe. Give it a little more of that sign look. It's a little bit undersized. I could maybe set the pivot point as the 3D cursor and scale it in all directions except for X. So I'm gonna hit Shift X. And that'll lock X. So it'll only scale in the Z and Y. Maybe make it 1.5 times bigger. That looks a little more realistic. It's still cartoony, but hey, that's kind of the look I'm going for. So now we just have to unwrap it, basically. I mean, that's a simple sign there for now. So let's open up our UV/image editor. Only the timeline, we can get rid of that. I'm going to show you a little trick I picked up too. Well, not a trick, something I've seen a lot of people use, but something that I've always forgotten to mention with texture painting once we get to it. Now we just need to unwrap everything. This is simple enough. I could probably smart UV project it and it would work quite perfectly, but I don't want to do that. I want to unwrap it manually for those of us that are learning to unwrap. So the bottom base, that's fairly easy. That's just going to be 2 seams, one for each portion of the circle. So I'm going to Alt right click on one of these circles here, and then I'm going to go Control E for the edge menu. Of course, this is all down here if you want the menus. Control E, mark seam. I'm going to do the same at the bottom. Alt right click, Control E, mark seam. And then I'm just going to mark one of these lines as a seam. Same deal. Marked seam. Now if we unwrap, our circle is unwrapped perfectly. And the side of, or the base I should say, so the top and bottom of the base are the same size and the sides are nice and straight, so that's perfect. So undo that. Moving on to the base here, actually I could even just select this, Control L and hide it for now. I could do the same for the sign part. I could hide that. Same deal, it's just a circle that's extruded further. So we're just gonna Alt right click on the top part, Control E, mark seam. Same to the bottom, Alt right click, Control E, mark seam. I'm going to select an edge here, Control Tab to get into your mesh select mode, Control E, mark seam, unwrap that. Looks pretty good. Again, the top and bottom are the same size, and the sides look, they're not perfectly straight, but we'll fix that. That'll be no problem. The sign deal, Control L to select linked. I'm going to select inverse, Control I. I'm going to hide that, and then we just need to unwrap this box. Let's see here. Let's create this edge, and this edge. Let's make those a seam. Let's make these to see it, you gotta visualize how this is gonna unfold. That won't unfold properly. Well, we'll need this side to be a seam as well. And whenever I'm making seams, as I showed you in the videos before, I always go and test unwrap it to see how it's looking, what's working, what's not, so we know that something's working. It's one part's looking straight. Undo that. Try a seam here, see what happens. That's kind of how I go about my way. Whoops, select it all, unwrap. So that unwraps just fine. I think that'll work for our needs. We just need to figure out what's the front and what's the back. Basically, I'm going to unhide everything though. So I'm going to undo that unwrap. I'm going to unhide everything. And now I'm going to select it all and unwrap. And so we now have our entire object unwrapped on our UV island. And we want to position everything. Now, the top of the base, I want to have a large part of the texture space. The front of the sign, I want to have a large part. The back, a larger part, but not as important. And all these sides and the sides of the cylinders, they're not important. Really, the tops and bottoms of the pole, not so important. You won't see them at all. And the bottom of the base, I don't think you'd really ever see that, so that's not very important. It won't need much space either. But first, let's give ourselves some space here. Let's take the sign. Let's move that off to the side. Let's take the pole. So I'm just Control for linking. Let's move that off to the side. And then let's take the base. And let's figure out what we're gonna do with that. So I'm gonna figure out which one's the top first. Bottom one's the top. Great. So I'm going to select this with face mode in the UV/image editor. I'm going to move it to the top just so that I know as a visual reference it's the top one and this is the bottom one. I'm going to double check that. Top. Yep, looks good. Alrighty, and these are the sides, these faces right here. So again, they're quite unimportant, but we'll grab them. We'll box select, circle select, whatever. We'll grab that. Whoops, I got that one selected. We'll move it in so that we know it's part of the base. I'm going to actually rotate it 90 degrees. And this is one that needed to be straightened out, I think, right? Well, let's find out how you check that. You take a point, say up here, in face mode and vertex mode, and then you want to compare it to the one down here. So turn on vertex snapping, then hit G, and then we want to go along the X direction, and we want to snap to this bottom right corner vertice to see if there's any offset. So I'm going to hold Control to snap there, and we have an offset of 0. So that is in line. I'll check the other side, GX, and I'll compare it to its twin, holding down Control, and there's no offset. So it looks pretty good. I'll check the Y. It looks straight though. GY. Compare it to there. Nope, we're good. I think this unwrapped just fine. GY. Nope, that is perfectly straight. So I'm going to select that entire piece, Control L. I'm going to scale it down again because it's not very important. Maybe to the height of the two base parts. We'll play with this more later. We'll put this off in the corner for now. And we'll work on the pole since that needs to be straightened out. So I'm going to figure out which one's the top and bottom again. I'm actually going to do the same deal. I'm going to hide the entire base. Hide the sign. I'm going to select the top. It's sitting right there. And then I'm going to select the bottom. And it's on top, so it's reversed again. So yeah, I'm just going to swap those around, go back into face mode. Put this one on top to make sure that I have a visual reference to know it's the top one. Grab the top just to make sure again. Yep, that highlights properly, so we know we're good. I'll just move this one accordingly off to the edge. I'm going to move them both out of the way actually for now. And I'm going to work on straightening this all out because obviously it is not straight. So there's a few ways to do this. One is manually to go vertex by vertex by vertex. So you can pick one that you want to work with. None of these are straight. Sorry about my fast movements. Yeah, none of these are straight. So essentially we're going to use a corner as a reference point, and all you would do is just grab a vertex and GY, and then with vertex snapping enabled, hold down Control and snap it to that point. You can see it's off by 0.0133 repeating units, so quite a bit of offset. So you could do that manually. There's also, if I undo that, there's also the ability to select an entire line and hit W for specials, and then you can try straighten, you can try straighten X, you can try straighten Y, you can try align X, nope, you can try align Y, and usually that'll work. So I can select a vertex and GY, again we're going to compare to its twin, so hold down Control, and there's no offset, so it looks like that's straight. I'm going to do the same to the top now. It's usually better to do it manually, but most of the time this works fine, especially for something as low profile as the sides of a pole. So yeah, specials, we learned that align Y worked just fine, so that looks good. And again, it really wouldn't matter what the scale is. I could have it like that and it would work just the same. The textures would just be applied differently. Now I just want to make sure these lines are straight vertically, so I'm going to GX on our reference vertex and compare it to its twin up here by holding down Control, and it's perfectly aligned. Grab this one, same thing, it's aligned. So there, that's fixed. That's all straight and perfect, just the way I like it. So we will bring these ones back. Again, they can be quite small because you're not going to see them, but we'll just bring this somewhere around here. Now for the sign, so I'm going to, in my 3D viewport, I'm going to unhide everything again, Alt-H. Oh, I got those overlapping, so I'll have to grab them up there. Onto the sign now. Control-L for linked. Make sure everything's straight. It should be because it's a cube, but just do a few reference checks. GX. Good. Yeah, and again, you could always just hit straighten and straighten X and straighten Y to make sure, but I'm confident that is. So yeah, like I said, the sides aren't that important. They could be resized. However, I believe they will be attached to this. So without marking new seams, I'm not going to worry about that too much. I'll leave it just the way it is. However, this entire face here, I want to figure out which one's front, so select one. That's the front. So this is the front, this is the back. Again, it's going to be attached, so without marking new seams, if I scaled it up, it would ruin all of our straightening outness. So I might actually unmark the front I might actually mark the front separately, seamed out completely. So the front is this one, double check, yep. So I'm just gonna put a seam right here so that it can be unwrapped completely separate. So I'm just gonna mark that as a seam. I'm gonna select that and re-unwrap it. And now we should have a separate face there. Which one is the front? I don't even know anymore. Go to right view, turn off limit selection visible. That is the front. Alrighty. Front, back. So I'll take the back and its associated sides, just move them off. So yeah, the front, I want to occupy a large portion of texture space. It looks like I can actually rotate it 90 degrees to fit it down in here nicely. And the back and sides looks like we can rotate that 90 degrees and they'll fit in there nicely somehow. Yeah, like that. We will scale it down a little bit just to make sure it fits in there nicely. This can be scaled up even more. I could, the pole sides, I'm going to rotate them 90 degrees. And scale them up. Actually, they'll get more room in there, so I'll put them in the corner there. I'll scale those up as big as they'll fit in there. You always want to maximize your texture space. And again, the tops and bottoms don't really matter, but we can scale them up just for sake that we have. The sake that we do have the room. Now the top of the base, like I said, I wanted to have a little more texture space, so I'm going to scale that up as big as I can fit in here. The bottom, again, we can scale that down. We'll never really see it, shouldn't matter. And the sides I will scale up to fit in here because they are somewhat visible. So fairly efficient use of our texture space. It could be a little bit better, but I'm fairly happy with that. I think that'll work just fine. Yeah, we can always change it later. So the quick little texture painting trick I wanted to show off was wanted to show for a while, but I've always forgotten, is to actually mark off parts of this using texture painting before we actually take this into our image editing software. So to do that, we just export our UV layout as normal. So UVs, export UV layout. I'm going to export it to my UV Unwraps folder. I'm going to make a new folder called StreetSign. And I'm going to call this uvs.png. I'm going to make it 248 by 248, so 2K. Fill opacity, I'll make it maybe 50%. Change it up for once. I wanted PNG. Oh, sorry about that, guys. Anyways, so we're going to export that. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to open that right up. If it's not available to us already, it's not. No, so I'm going to open it up. So first of all, I want to add a material to my object. I have one handy, of course, and I want it to be an image texture. So just like as if we were to UV unwrap it, I'm basically putting my UV grid over the image or over the object. I'm going to open my UV unwrap, what we just exported. And that's going to be its texture, so nothing changes except for the fact that you would have the edges from the unwrap. If we went into texture mode, you can see them there. But what I'm going to do is go into texture paint mode, and using black, I can just make a big F for front so that I would know. And then I could go here and I could call this T for top. And you could do things like that as visual reminders, and then you just image, save image, and then that is your new UV layout. And so you have now you have a visual cue as to what's what. And you could go further. I could make a smaller pen radius, and I could call this like post. Oh, writing sideways is hard. Post sides, so that you would know. I'm just gonna leave it with the F and T as a reference just to show this off. But anyways, yeah, that's just kind of what I learned. So yeah, just make sure that is saved out, and we're gonna go into Photoshop now, and we're gonna make some textures for this. Make it look as physically realistic as possible. So we'll open up our UV Unwrap export, create a new layer. I'm going to use this as a background. See a little better. I'm going to fill it with a pure white. My colors aren't set up, sorry. Let's get started just with the diffuse texture, obviously, first. I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to group it with Control G. I'm going to call this group diffuse. I've come into the habit of making groups of layers for all of my textures within one PSD file. So yeah, let's start with the diffuse layer. So I'm just gonna grab just a basic metal texture, or I could just make something up, but I'll just grab just a basic metal texture. Let me see what I can find. Alright, so this is from my own personal collection, a pack that I either purchased or downloaded, I can't remember, so I'm not sure if I can give the textures away or not, but I'm sure you could find something similar on cgtextures.com. This is just going to be a nice base metal texture. I'm going to use it. It has some little bits of rust, and it's got a little bit of bumpiness to it, and this I thought would work great for the base because it's got some scratches, it's got that checker plate, and it's same deal. It's got some little rust that'll go good with that. I think this comes from the same pack, so I'm going to use that. So I'm going to start with that. I'm going to copy this all out and paste it into here, and we want our UVs to be a layer lower so we can see what we're doing. So this is going to be for the top base. So I am simply just going to give it a little bit of opacity. I'm going to fit it to this texture, or to this part of the UV Unwrap texture, and then I'm sure it'll look just fine the way it is. And the bottom will get the exact same thing. So I'm going to duplicate it, Control J, move it over to the bottom, and scale it down. Just for kicks and giggles, we'll duplicate that, Control J, and use it for the bottom and top of the signpost caps, but you'll never see them, so that doesn't really matter in my opinion. But for completeness sake. And so what was I going to do with this one? Oh yeah, that was just my general metal texture. So I'm going to use it for the sides of the signpost and the sides of the base. I'm going to actually use this texture, but for the sides of the signpost I'm going to use this base metal texture. So I'll paste that in, and this will be cool because it'll get some nice bumpiness on it. Let's turn this one down temporarily so I can see what I'm doing. So I'm just gonna scale this. I'm not too worried about a little bit of stretching. I'm gonna fit it in there. So that'll be the sides of our signpost. I guess that works too. I shouldn't have made the opacity half. I should have left it at a quarter. Kind of hard to see your textures underneath. And now, yeah, so for the sides of the base, I'm just gonna reuse this checker plate texture. And I believe it's tileable, but if not, it won't make a big difference because it's got such a repeating nature to it that I'm sure it'll look just fine. I'm gonna use this part. Maybe I'll use the scratched up part, and then I'm just gonna continually duplicate bottom to top, merge down, Control E, duplicate, Control J, duplicate. Sorry, there we go. That covers it. Alrighty, that covers that. I'm sure it'll look just fine. Now the side, it really doesn't need much texture. It's usually made of a basic, maybe a gray, I guess. I'm not going to use a texture. I'm just going to simply do a paint. So I'm just going to make a new layer. And I'm just going to use the paintbrush. I'm just going to take a standard brush and just paint this medium gray over the entire side of the sign. Good enough for the girls I go out with, I'm sure. Now onto the front, the important one. I should be naming these. I will call this one a front sign face. So for this, I'm going to just make up a sign texture. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to use, you could do a bunch of different things. I'm just going to use the line tool with quite a wide size. And I'm just going to make basically some big, like you would see on some sort of construction sign. I don't know, we'll say maybe 175 pixels wide. Yeah, looks pretty good, I think. So I'll start in the corner to start with, very corner, and then I'll hold down what is it in Photoshop, shift to get a complete 45 or 90 degree angle. I'm going to go 45 degrees to get those nice stripes that you would get. Sorry, I guess I have to do a color overlay on this, like so. So I'm just going to duplicate that. Oh, I'm going to rasterize it, rasterize the layer style, and then I'm just going to duplicate it and move it along so it looks like a nice pattern. Merge those, duplicate, same deal. That should cover it. And then we'll just cut off the excess, obviously. Now we need a background to that, so I'm just going to select slightly larger than the actual UV, and I'm going to fill it with, I guess I can use this medium gray here, and put it underneath that. And there is our sign face, and we could add text to it or whatever if we wanted, but I want to keep it fairly simple. So that is the diffuse layer. So let's give it a test. Let's uncheck our UVs. Where the heck are they? Well, they're in this layer. I don't want them in this layer. So uncheck my UVs. And I should be able to save this like this and see how it looks. So I'm going to save this as a PNG. And I'm going to call this StreetSign underscore diff for diffuse. You can also go COL for color, whatever your preference. Now I'm going to replace this image. So the material that we have set up, I'm just going to replace the image with the one that we just made, the diffuse, obviously. So that gives us that look. So not the best looking model I've ever made, but I think that looks decent enough. I mean, we're only looking at 260 tries. That's extremely low poly. Anyways, so now we need to make our other maps. I'm going to skip the bump map. I'm going to go straight onto the specularity to do the retro reflectiveness for the actual sign. So back in Photoshop, now that we know that that looks good enough for our needs, I am going to simply duplicate this group. And this I am going to call specularity, whatever. And it needs to be colorless. So I'm gonna go, what is the command now? Control-Alt-D. Alright, so that is the base start of our specularity map. However, I want to add in that retro reflectiveness, which I would want a pure white grid. So I could do this by hand the same way I did this, but I'm just going to quickly Google a grid. So off Google, I found this nice large, nice honeycomb grid. However, that's quite ugly. So to fix that, I'm first going to make sure it's desaturated, and then I'm going to use very harsh levels to just go completely black or completely white. Yeah, I want it completely white everywhere. So, and check, that is, yep, all F's, completely white everywhere. So it's not the most precise of grids, but it will work for what we need, I think. I'm actually going to scale this. I wanted it to be a bit thicker than that. The easiest way to do that would be to select the entire grid and then select modify expand by, say, 3 pixels. Ooh, quite large, but might work. And then I'm gonna fill that with pure white. I can actually delete and then fill with pure white. Now we have our own honeycomb grid. That should be a decent size that we can try. So yeah, I'm gonna leave that like that. So that'll be absolutely the brightest part of our image. So let's try that out. Let's see what it looks like. So I'm gonna save this first I need to make sure I turn off the diffuse layer and take the specularity layer and save as StreetSign _ spec. Now we need to just go into Blender and set up specularity on this. So I'm going to take that material. I'm going to call this sign just so I know what it is. And we'll go into the node editor. So using our specularity image texture as the factor for a glossy shader, you guys all know how to do this. We get the effect we want, but it's not quite as I was hoping for. I mean, the metal reflects just fine, and I'm sure the face sign does, but the retro reflection not so much. I'm gonna try scaling it down and see what happens. Alright, so by scaling down the honeycomb pattern for the retro reflectiveness, I have managed to essentially get the effect. And also I've added in a brightness / contrast node in between our specularity image texture and our the specularity texture setup, because obviously it's a little bit too bright and a little bit too much contrast. It needs to be leveled out a little bit and darkened a little bit, which I'm not gonna spend the time in Photoshop doing that. It's just easier to use a node. If I wanted to put it in a game, then I would obviously adjust it to these properties in Photoshop, but you see the effect we get. Basically, let's see here, Shift F. Basically, when viewed at an angle, it just looks like a regular sign, but when viewed head on, if you were a car, you get that very reflective look. You know, if you were a car, say, driving by, let's say you're on the road and you're zooming by, you get that look that it shines off at you, and then it looks like a normal sign too. So depending on the angle you look at it, depends on how much light is reflected and how it's reflected, basically. So you get that kind of retro reflective look. And I'm sure with some cool node setups, you could probably get that kind of multicolor kind of sparkly look, but that'll be for another video to get that look. That would be much too complicated for this simple tutorial. I don't know if I'm going to go into actually making a displacement map for this. I think that's quite good enough as it is. You guys can go over some of my other videos where I make bump maps manually in Blender. For something as simple as this, basically I don't have to worry about the sign face. It's completely smooth. I can hide that actually. All the metal you would just basically play with. Well, I'll have to merge these all down. You would just have to play with the levels and curves, obviously, as usual. Pure white is sticking out the most, and completely black is basically looking like it's extruded inwards, like there's a divot basically. So you want basically a fairly even mid-tone, and then depending on your texture, it'll depend how bright or how dark you would want it. In the case of metal, we would want a fair amount of contrast, but not a lot, so that basically the scratches will look like they are sticking in. So here it's the wrong way around, so what I would do is just invert it and then save this out as where's PNG, as StreetSign just for displacement, bump, whatever your preference is. Back into the node editor, and then we just need to add in another texture setup. So we take our image texture into the displacement layer of our material output, or node I should say, and then open it up. And in this case it's quite bumpy, but yeah, you can see the texture wasn't big enough to see, but yeah, it looks like it has more bumpiness than before. Obviously that's a little extreme, a little off, so I would need to play with it a bit more. It needs to be leveled out a lot. So you would maybe something like that might work better. Let's see how that looks. Not so extreme. So we will simply just go into the UV image editor, reload that image, and yeah, not quite so extreme. And you can see the actual the checker plate actually bumps out. And again, this is still a little extreme, or my texture resolution isn't high enough, obviously, but you can obviously see how that adds detail. Up here it looks a lot nicer, so it takes some playing around with, but yeah, that is basically that. So yeah, like I said, but the main effect I was looking for here was the retroreflectiveness, how you get that kind of honeycomb reflectiveness depending on how you look at it. So kind of cool. So yeah, that is a basic little StreetSign setup, and we could go into more detail about this. If you have any more questions about it, definitely let me know. Like I said, I wanted to answer the questions of how to UV unwrap something, how to do low poly assets, yeah, how to unwrap, and then how to texture and how to render something. So now that I've got all my textures set up, all I do is a regular render, and it renders out just like that. And on the topic of using it as a low poly game asset, all we need to do now is take it in edit mode and then triangulate the faces. So Control T, and we'll check it out in rendered mode, make sure that didn't make anything look wonky, but it looks pretty good to me. So yeah, now it is completely game ready. It's all tries. So again, yeah, 260 tries, extremely low poly, and you could plop that right into your game. Again, we would just have to make sure that our origin point is right on the bottom, which it is, so that would go right into Unity perfectly. So yeah, that is really all there is to it for the most part. So I hope you learned something from this. I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully it answered some questions if you were watching it for that reason. So again, thanks for watching from the team here at BlenderTech.com. If you liked it, if you did learn something, consider subscribing and liking the video. We're on Twitter at twitter.com/blender_tech and Facebook at facebook.com/blendertechpage. We're looking for YouTube partners, so if you have any Blender skills and want to make continual passive income on it, if you're a good animator, a good character creator, a good sculptor, a good texture maker, if you have any skills, or if you're good at Photoshop, if you're good at video editing, if you wanna do a gaming channel, I'm looking to do some diversification and to just basically reduce my workload and diversify my YouTube account. I've already set up some new channels. If you have skills in programming or using Unity or Unreal 4 engine, and you want a partnership, give me a jingle at info@blendertech.com, or comment, and or Facebook or Twitter, and we can discuss more. I made a video on it. I'll link to it once I get to annotating it. Anyways, if you dislike this video for some reason, don't just hit the thumbs down button and leave. Instead, tell us what you did not like so that we can continually improve our videos based on community input. We also take requests and call for help, so if there's a tutorial you'd like to see, or if you're having problems with something, we will definitely make a video for you if time permits. So see you next time, and remember, create your way.